because Lanchester and Dana were kind of going downhill, and Jaguar bought them, so I became a Jaguar apprentice, and that's how I became a Jaguar apprentice, really.
Well, you left Jaguar for a while and was back, right?
No, I stayed with them all the time, but Lofty England, who had been the team manager when Jaguar won Le Mans in 54, 55, 56, he became the managing director. And he and I used to race ourselves to work in the morning. I was on my motorbike, I had a Triumph Speed Twin, and he had a prototype E-Type, and we'd race from Leamington, where I lived, to Coventry, where the factory was. The only trouble was, he was supposed to be there, I was supposed to be there about an hour earlier than he was. And a couple of times he would be arms akimbo and saying, looking at his watch, saying, "Oh, what's this?" But I somehow caught his eye when I was racing Dad's Jag, and he thought I was a good racer. He said, "You're not just fast, but you race well," because he was the clerk of the course at a race meeting at Silverstone when me and a DB4, an Aston Martin DB4, and me had a terrific race with pass and repass and pass and repass, and it was a really good little race. And that somehow impressed old Lofty, and he helped me get my first professional drive when I left Jag in 1961. Well, my apprenticeship ended, and I got married, and then I went, and 3 weeks after I got married, I went to Daytona for the very first Rolex race, which then was a 3-hour sports car race, and I went with an E-Type when Lofty had got me that drive.
Yeah, wait. You had a chance to meet Bill France back then. And you were dancing in the street with Fireball Roberts' wife?
This is true. I went to Daytona, and we did the 3-hour. Unfortunately, I didn't last very long before the fuel pump broke. And Jimmy Clark was driving my Lotus Elite. Colin Chapman had rung us up and said, "Would you mind if Jimmy Clark drives your Elite in the 3-hour race?" So he drove, and he was leading the class by miles. Came in for his one and only pit stop, and the engine wouldn't start. The starter motor got fried by the heat. My car dropped out, and then Bill said, "Well, why don't you stick around for the 500? We might get you driving the 500. So Jimmy and I both practiced in Holman and Moody's Galaxies, which I must say was pretty scary, because the fastest car I'd driven up to them was a Lotus Elite, which with a downhill and a tailwind, it might do 120. And there we were averaging 150 odd mile an hour around Daytona in this bloody awful Galaxy thing. Well, luckily Dan Gurney, who had won the 3-hour, was there, and they put him in the race. But I did stay for the race, and I got to know Fireball Roberts pretty well. And Fireball Roberts had a lovely girlfriend, Judy I think her name was. And like all those NASCAR guys of old, he was a partier, he was a real party animal. And we went out one night, and we were going down Volusia Avenue, where it crosses Main Street. There was a traffic light there then. And about 2 o'clock in the morning, Judy and I leapt out this car right in the middle of the intersection and danced to the car radio. That's right, that was true.
You were involved in a lot of 2 a.m. parties. I remember one time you came to Jacksonville on a promotion for the Formula 5000, and we closed up the last bar in Jacksonville. You were upset we couldn't find anything open at 2:30.
I don't know where these rumors come from. They really are quite scurrilous. But the last 2 nights have been pretty hair-raising here. I think they're the Best Western too, but people keep finding bottles of wine to show me at 2 o'clock in the morning. I don't know where this reputation comes from. But that was a good night. Dance with Judy, right there in the middle of the island. It's still there today.
You ran the Lotus Elite at Le Mans, and you drove for Triumph at Le Mans. How did that come about?
Well, I drove the Lotus. It wasn't my Elite I drove at Le Mans. That was a Team Elite car. That was the official Team Lotus. And I was driving with Frank Garden, the Australian driver, who was always a barrel of laughs. And we won the class, and we won the index of performance, and we won the index of thermal efficiency, which the French always wanted to win. We snatched it from under their noses, won the class, came 8th overall, and that was in 1962 as well, just after I'd come over here for the 3-hour at Daytona. So I was pretty good in the league, and then the year after that I drove the Lola Mark 6 in 1963 with Richard Atwood. Unfortunately, I crashed it at the Esses in the middle of the night when the gearbox, we had trouble, a lot of trouble with the gearbox. We had the gearbox off and taking it apart and put it together again, and it was minus a gear. And it got stuck in neutral going into the Esses, and I crashed it. And then the following 2 years, I drove a Triumph Spitfire at Le Mans. Can't say it was my favourite car to drive at Le Mans, but there it is.
Well, the was kind of the predecessor of the Ford GT.
It was absolutely a predecessor of the Ford GT. It was a beautiful car. It was really well designed and it was fast. In fact, after the gearbox broke and I only had 3 gears, I did the second fastest lap of the race to William Merriss, who was driving the Ferrari. So it was a quick car.
Now you not to bring up sore points, but you ran the at Oakland Park with the Lola 270 of Eric Broadley's. It was an early car, one of the first ones, and you were the fastest guy, and you had the fastest time, and you finished second.
Well, that's kind of the story of my life, really. I'm either finishing second because of some screw up by the officials, or Brian Redmond's in the race, where I'm going to finish second anyway. So, yeah, it was. The RAC had decided that the tourist trophy race at Alton Park would be 2 2-hour heats. So, but in each heat, they dropped the flag behind Denny Holm, who was in a BT8, and in front of my Lola 270. So he got to complete the lap both times. So they said that he had done more distance than I had, but it was a 4-hour race. So he actually took about 4 hours and 8 minutes, and I took about 4 hours and 1 minute. So my average speed was higher than his was. And Eric Broadley, this would have been the first really big win for the Lola 270. And this was in 1965, the first year of race. And Eric Broadley was up there with the RAC guys, and he was basically in tears saying, "But don't you understand?" And they said, "Unfortunately, we do understand now, but it's too late, there's nothing we can do about it," and we were second.
Put a sidebar on that story. I found that Brabham BT8 of Denny Holmes in the South Carolina junkyard, 1976, bought it for $2,900. And one day David was up at the house and said, "I got a project I'm restoring over the shop. Why don't you come look at it?" I went over and it was that nightmare of a BT8. And I remember you looked at me and I think you signed a poster of the BMW that said, "To Bill, the world's fastest driver, albeit in a crook car."
Well,
world's fastest photographer, not driver.
It was amazing to see that car again after all those years. And the BT8 was a terrific car, there's no doubt about it, but the way the RAC had organised the race just snatched a victory, or snatched defeat from the jaws of victory.
The Golf GT40 program, you came to Daytona in 68. How did that come about?
Well, in 66 and 67, I drove for John Surtees. Well, I drove that Lola 270 we just talked about in 1965, and John Surtees was running the official Lola program for Eric in a T70. And he got hurt badly at Mosport in 1965. He broke his back when he went off of turn 1. And so he asked me to drive his car for him in 1966 and 67, which was a bit of a mixed blessing really, because we only did about half the races. We were never ready on time. It was always under finance. It was a bit unfortunate really. But anyway, I did drive for him in 66, 67. And at the end of 67, David York, who was the team manager of the Golf Wire Ford team, said, "Would you like to drive for us in 68, 69 in the GT40s?" So obviously, for me, this is my first, after 10 years of racing, this is now my first really big opportunity. And it was a wonderful effort, and of course the big team, John Wire, who had won Le Mans in 1959 with Roy Salvadori, and Carroll Shelby in the Aston Martin, he ran their program, and then he ran this GT40 program. So it was a great opportunity, and our first race was Daytona. And we were leaving Daytona, and at 7 o'clock in the morning I'd come into a fuel stop, and I'm just sitting in the car, and David York signals me to get out, and I sort of said, "What, me, get out?" And the fuel was just, they put in the fuel in as fast as they put it, it was running out underneath the car, because it had back tanks which were in the side pontoons, and they had worn through and spun a leak, so we were out.
You didn't transition into the 917 program with John Wire, but you went Formula 5000 racing. Was that the decision?
No, the reason I didn't transition into the 917 team was because we came for a test at Daytona in December, probably 1969, after the season was over, because the Wire team was going to transition from the GT40s to running the Porsche factory team. And obviously I wanted to drive for them. And in the test, the Porsche guys were not that happy with me for some reason or other. They had got and the golf, Finland had got this guy called Leo Kinnunen up their sleeve. They wanted to put him in the car, and I made it easy for them by mis-shifting as I went up onto the banking turn, and I selected the wrong gear. They went down instead of up, and blew the big flat 12 up. So the crowd said, "Oh, that's it, he's out," you know. And of course, that 917 flexed so much. It was a real flexible flyer, and the gear shift was huge because it was a long way from the gear shift to the back of the gearbox on the 917. And over the course of the year, I mean, everybody did the same thing. The car flexed so much that practically everybody blew at least one engine up. Joe Sifford, of course, being the best of all, when they were leading by about 5 minutes at Le Mans in 1970, and he did exactly what I did at Daytona, but he did it right in front of their own pit.